So this is hard work. It's a book that's going to put a lot of people off. His thoughts are going to make people react badly. Hello again, it's Mark, and I'm back with this one. The Meditations is a book that you can very easily dip into and out of, and it's been around a long time. You can go whole years, decades, and never read it, or you could be in your 50s and 60s and never have read it, and you can hopefully take something from it. In my first foray with this book, I looked at how Marcus Aurelius, because that's the author, the old Roman emperor, and what he said about don't fear death, be prepared for it. It's going to happen. It happened to him, and it's happened to everybody we ever read about in history, and it happened to our great-great-grandparents. Eventually, our great-great-grandchildren will be looking back and thinking, oh, I wonder what we were like. But death is not the only thing. It's how you live life. And in this, the second episode of this, I think there'll be probably 3 or 4, I'm going to carry on from where he says he's writing in Carnuntum, which is on the Danube. It's actually in modern Austria. And he was there, I think it's Pannonia, part of the Pannonian fleet. He was facing difficulties keeping the Germanic tribes out of the empire. It had spread really as far as it was going to, almost. And he would have been thinking about life. He was the emperor. He had everything. How do you have a good life? What is the purpose of it? Now, of course, you're going to agree or disagree because he was a Stoic. And the way he was looking at life, what it meant, he had the opportunity to think of such things, where vast majority of the people he ruled over would never have the ability or time to think this through. Now, there's an old saying, food first, then morals. And he's talking about the morality of the Stoics. He was in a position that he could sit back and think about it. He didn't have to worry about putting food on the table. So in a way, we have to put that into context. But he does say a lot of things that he was learning potentially from a study of Stoicism, and therefore, as it's a continual thing and has had influence throughout the centuries, let's see what he says. Just before we get going, though, he really gets into it. It's book 3. He does have to say something about Socrates and the fact that he, of course, no doubt somebody that Marcus Aurelius really admired, he was put to death at the trial and had to take hemlock. And he says these things. Vermin of another sort killed Socrates. Yeah, he obviously didn't care for the people who put him on trial. He said, you embarked, you set sail, you made port. Go ashore now. If it is to another life, nothing is empty of the gods, even on that shore. And if, to insensibility, you will cease to suffer pains and pleasures, no longer in thrall to a bodily vessel which is a master as far inferior as its servant is superior. One is mind in divinity, the other a clay of dust and blood. Now this is important for what's about to come, because in effect what he's saying is, if you are to have a good life, stop thinking about this vessel of basically dust and blood. Release pleasures. And I'm in two minds whether he was referring to Socrates. If you've gone beyond to another shore, then obviously you've released the prison of the body, or he was talking about himself, or if by extension we can talk about ourselves. But he's obviously philosophically minded, is old Marcus, and he wants to pursue the good, capital T, capital G. He says on page 18, a wrestler for the greatest prize of all, to avoid being thrown by any passion, died to the core with justice. What is life for? It's to be just. It's to what the Greeks called follow arete. What is the purpose? What is our purpose? What are we here for? What is our true role? Well, it's to be as just and as virtuous, virtus, the Roman word, as possible. Rarely wondering what others may be saying or doing or thinking. So one of the greatest Stoic philosophers of all time was Diogenes of Sinope. And he, he lived in a barrel. And there's this great painting, which you can now see, where he's in the barrel and he's at the foot of these steps, and these women in lovely dress are looking down on him. He effectively said no to any of the what he considered false trappings of vanity. And he made, in effect, a virtue of poverty. He said that the only thing you need in life is food, shelter, but you don't need it to be ostentatious. I think he was in Athens, if I remember. This is kind of what Marcus Aurelius is talking about, although, of course, he lived in luxury. And he's talking about the fact that being an emperor, Marcus, he's going to get all this praise and all this sycophancy, and he could very easily fall foul of believing it. And he said, rarely wondering what others may be saying or doing or thinking. He will constantly remind himself what sort of people they are who do not lead such lives of virtue. What they are like both at home and abroad, by night and by day. They and the polluting company they keep. So he disregards even the praise of such men. These are people who are not even satisfied with themselves. So there's this long theme going throughout Stoicism and also with Marcus Aurelius, that if you fall to bodily pleasures, the pursuit of trappings, ostentatious wealth, display of such things, no, he said, effectively, anybody who follows that is in effect not happy with themselves. Well, let that sink in. You know, when you see that painting, and I'll put it up again, here we are, he's renounced all such things, and the ladies looking at him can't quite believe it. Well, you think about that today. Could you imagine somebody giving everything away and living like a hermit? No doubt some people do. But that's an assault on all of us, isn't it? Because we all hanker after a house, a big house, lots of rooms. We all hanker after the big car and the status and the wealth. It's almost baked into the system of life that we live, as it was in the day of Diogenes. So to turn around and say that these people, that we are not satisfied with ourselves, is that true? Possibly. If you decide to follow a course of virtue and renounce such things, you have got to be ramrod straight when you're going to be buffeted by criticism of others. Your duty, he says, is to stand straight, not be held straight. You've got to do it yourself. And he talks about if you're going to go through life and you're going to be the best possible virtuous person of good and right, believing in proper justice, treating people with respect. And it's not just in Stoicism, it's found in the golden rule, do unto others as they would do unto you. That is something that the ancients understood, and we still have it today. But it says here, further on in Book 3, nothing is so conducive to greatness of mind as the ability to subject each element of our experience in life to methodical and truthful examination. This is very much like Socrates, know thyself. He said, the unexamined life is not worth living. You can sleepwalk your way through life, but you're not thinking about how to become better. That's not a life worth living, according to, well, in this case, Marcus Aurelius and the whole series of such minded philosophers, especially the ancients. And of course, it was a much simpler age then. Perhaps they could do that. Similar, I suppose, to the concept of our mind, because he's very much about the mind. And it could be very easily trapped inside our bodies, especially if the soul and the mind is divine and wants to go one way, but our body wants to go this way because we want all the wealth and all the status. And to do that, according to Stoicism and Aurelius, you're going to have to close down your mind. You're going to be close-minded. And I'm always reminded of the dictate that the mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. But so often people, and I myself for many years, free fall through life and we never pull the ripcord to open the mind. And that's what, according to Marcus Aurelius, we should be doing. He wouldn't have used the parachute analogy, but there you go. What he says here is what we should be doing. So I'll reread this, but putting it into context of myself and therefore yourself. What is this which is now making an impression on me, on you? So you're confronted with, say, criminality or somebody embezzling. What is it composed of? How long in the nature of things will this last? What virtue is needed to face up towards it? He says to meet it. Is it gentleness, for example, or courage, or truthfulness, loyalty, simplicity, self-sufficiency, and so on? So whatever you come across in your daily lives, and you might subconsciously, if not openly, think, oh, that's not right. You're coming across a politician who's acting in a certain way. You've got to think, hang on, how do we confront this if we are to be virtuous? Do we respond? Do we ignore it? Do we engage? Do we try to counter it with our, I don't know. I'm trying to thread together some thoughts here and failing miserably. So if we are to have a virtuous life, we need to start living the virtuous life. And if we're confronted with people who are not virtuous, it'd be very easy for us to, or the person trying to be virtuous, to give in and say, oh, I can't win. Or we stand up and we just do that little bit of difference. We show others what it is to be virtuous. I think that's what Marcus Aurelius is saying here. That is as challenging now as it was then. Probably more now because of the fact there's more people and we're open much more to counter-narratives and we're much more open to other examples in far-off places we'll never see, but it seeps into the consciousness as this is what is becoming the norm. So perhaps it's down to us to start making the difference. And like a stagnant pond, you throw in a little pebble and it hardly makes a ripple, and it certainly won't have an effect on the stagnant pond. But if hundreds, if not thousands of people thronged around that pond start throwing pebbles in, it will start to have an effect. But boy, will that be difficult. Aurelius is really, I was going to say mindful of the mind, but that's an oxymoron. He's very interested in the mind. Now, when I read this part, I'm on book 4 now, I instantly thought, oh, wow, yeah. And it was to do with the fact that I was watching something on YouTube, and it was about influencers who were going abroad and filming themselves, and they'll go from one place to another and a country to another. A bit like my rambles, which I love. And great, not a problem. But we need to be reminded of something, and this is what it says here. Men seek retreats for themselves, in the country, by the sea, in the hills. But no retreat offers someone more quiet and relaxation than that into his own mind, especially if he can dip into thoughts there which put him at immediate and complete ease. So constantly give yourself this retreat and renew yourself. Go inwardly instead of outwardly. Boy, isn't that nice to be reminded that often in hectic times, if you're at work and you think, oh, I need a break, I need a holiday. Yeah, you do. So take the best one. Go inwardly, be mindful, clear all the detritus and the clutter that's up here that's causing you to be awake every night, and think, just relax, chill. It's nice to be reminded of that. Of course, we're living in a world now, and let's be honest, if you're listening to this, chances are you yourself are a booktuber or you are interested in booktube. And there's a lot of influencers out there, if that's the right word, or content creators. I think that's the phrase that's now falling to the side. But effectively, if you put yourself out there and you become known to others, there is this temptation to try and grab fame. And often the spotlight is put on you regardless of what you're doing. But some people will want attention. They'll want the fame. But Marcus Aurelius has something to say about that. He says, the universe is a kind of community. Will a little fame distract you? Look at the speed of universal oblivion. The gulf of immeasurable time both before and after, in other words, you. The vacuity of applause. The indiscriminate fickleness of your apparent supporters. The tiny room in which all this is confined. Fame. So in 1807, there was a really famous person, an author. And he was considered one of the greatest writers of his time. In the years leading up to that and afterwards. William Hazlitt. Ever heard of him? Look him up. He's now considered one of the greatest critics and essayists in the history of the English language, placed in the company of Samuel Johnson and George Orwell. But despite his high standing among historians of literature and art, his work is currently little read and mostly out of print. Fame. What is it? Everybody knew him in his era. No longer. All the people that are famous now, we're not going to be talking about them potentially 2 or 3 centuries from now. The people we do tend to talk about tended to have been those people, probably small community-led people who made a difference. Yes, we'll always have the infamous and the barbaric. They'll always be written, but they'll always be Jack the Ripper. But again, we don't know who that is. But what we tend to remember, the people who made a difference in the long term. The thing about fame, it's fickle. The fickle finger of fame, and often it puts the finger up to you. Effectively, what are people pursuing? Well, according to Marcus Aurelius, what are we? It's vacuous. It's a miserable time, before and after, nothing. So what are you trying to achieve? Is that something in life you should be pursuing? And of course, what we're talking about here is Marcus Aurelius's recommendations as to how to have a good life. And he's obviously saying, don't bother with the fame. And he had it. Also, praise. Fake praise. Praise is no part of it. Praise does not make anything better or worse. Does the truly beautiful need anything beyond itself? No more than law, no more than truth, no more than kindness or integrity. That's what's needed. Which of these things derives its beauty from praise or withers under criticism? Does an emerald lose its quality if it is not praised? And what of gold, ivory, purple, a lyre, a dagger, a flower, a bush? And that's wonderful to be mindful of. You can bow down to the ocean. You could say it's wonderful. The ocean don't care. It's going to be there 1,000 years from now. Same with an emerald. It will be around. It may be cut up into small pieces and put into jewellery. But the emerald itself is oblivious to that. It's only we that say it's praiseworthy. And on the neck, it's supposedly of value. But is it? It's just a rock. So we go after the wrong things, if I'm reading Marcus Aurelius correctly. If you want to be happy, do what is necessary, what the reason of a natural social being demands. Most of what we say and do is unnecessary. Yes, absolutely. Remove the superfluity, and you will have more time and less bother. Why bother? In sum, life is short. Make your gain from the present moment with right reason and justice. Keep sober and relaxed. I think when I first read that, I thought, what, no drink? No, it doesn't mean that. Love both your own nature and her purpose for you. So if you're going to go through life and there's going to be a reason for it, when you hit your hundreds and you've had a full life and you're still compos mentis, as you're laying on your deathbed, you're about to shuffle off and you'll be thinking, if only I'd spent 1 more hour at work. No, you won't. You won't be thinking that, as I said in previous episodes. You'll be thinking, was I a good person? What am I going to be remembered for? How did I make people feel? And that, I think, if you read Marcus Aurelius and other people like him, is what they're saying. And it's why I think often, although he's well known, he'll be left on the shelf. Most people don't want to be reminded of that. And this is interesting. So most people are careful of their own health. We're often unmindful of others unless you happen to be in the medical profession or a very caring person or a parent. But generally, we're focused on our own health. But Aurelius is saying that's not good enough. You should take the same view of the process and completion of the design of universal nature, what the universe wants you to be. You should be mindful of that as you do of your own health. And so welcome all that happens to you, even if it seems cruel, because its purpose leads to the health of the universe. We're a community. The universe has plans for us, but the universe is much bigger. And if things happen to us, stop moaning, boo-hoo, it's me. Think about, well, how is this benefiting the greater community? Well, boy, isn't that hard. That is amazingly difficult to do. Revere the ultimate power in the universe. This is what makes us all things and directs all things. Reflect often on the speed in which all things are carried past and swept away. You can't see off camera. I'm looking at a picture. It's both myself and my wife on our wedding day. 35 years ago now, almost. We also have a much larger picture of all the people that were at that wedding. Some were much younger than us, but they're no longer with us. Time has moved on, so have they. The speed in which all things are carried past and swept away. It must be folly for anyone to be puffed with ambition, racked in struggle, or indignant at his lot. So what is there left to keep us here? If the objects of sense are ever changeable and unstable, everything comes and goes. If our senses themselves are blurred and are easily smudged like wax, if our very soul is a mere exhalation of blood, if success in such a word is vacuous, what then? What is the point of life? Well, then he gives the answer. A calm wait for whatever it is, either extinction or translation. And until the time for that comes, bear and forbear. And to remember that all that lies within the limits of our poor carcass and our little breath is neither yours nor in your power. You're not going to decide when you go. Got to be careful of my words now. Some people will end it thinking that's the time. But what Marcus is saying is that there's a greater force beyond ourselves. Time, if nothing else. And we can't alter that. We can't change the past. And some people will say, I don't think he says it in the book, we can't even alter the future. That's already preordained. So really thoughtful. And I'm coming up to the final third. There's actually some things left for Marcus Aurelius to talk about that I remember. Talking about death is one thing. And I note that although I just started when I started talking about him, that's not the kind of thing that turns people on to want to listen to. And that's understandable. If you're in the mindset that I've got a life to live and I'm going to make what I want, fine, you're not going to listen to Marcus Aurelius or anybody else. Likewise, when it comes to how to live a good life, that's just his opinion. One of many. People are going to counter that and say, no, this is the problem with Stoicism and da-da-da-da. Yeah, there is much to say against the arguments, I think, of Marcus Aurelius. He's too typically hard-faced, but he's in a position that he can afford to be. I can't imagine somebody working down a lithium mine in Cameroon wanting to write something like this. It'll be wholly different. So he is in a privileged position, or was. But what he says, I think a lot of it can be taken out. And if we soften the edges a bit and make it more contemporary, there's some nuggets here that I think could be put on the table as being true, or at least approaching some form of truth. And one is, we often go through life not really considering what's happening to us, or why. And if things do happen, it's always bad. Well, it might be for good. You might not see it as good, ever. So when I was made redundant for the first time in the mid-90s, it was like a stab in the back. That was hard, because the first thing that was going through my mind when I was told the news, mortgage. Oh, damn, how am I going to get to afford the car? But according to Marcus Aurelius, those things aren't needed. But try and say that to your bank manager. But I went out, and within a month I got a better paid job. That ended in a redundancy as well, because I don't know about where you live, but Britain in the 1990s went through an appalling 18 months to 2 year period of so many businesses collapsing. It was awful. It wasn't called a depression, it was a recession, but it might as well have been a depression. I was made redundant 3 times in about a 3 year period. And it's one of the reasons I decided to leave publishing to go to university when I was 33. Because I thought, I can't keep going on like this. I could keep getting jobs, but it was getting tedious. I think the universe was telling me something. There could have been, and probably was, periods I got really angry. But that is not the way to approach it. They ended up being good things. I didn't see it at the time. Neither did I see going through the dark night of the soul a good thing at the time. Only now can I look back and think, yeah, I wouldn't want to do it again, but I'm glad I did it. It's a way of stripping away ego. Ego for wealth, ego for status, and all that kind of stuff. So this is hard work. It's a book that's going to put a lot of people off. His thoughts are going to make people react badly. And it's understandably why. Because he was a much innocent, different age. I still think it has value, appropriate for now, but we are in a world of billions and most of them can't be bothered. And the question, the age-old question is, why should they? If we all lived the life that Marcus Aurelius and Diogenes, and to some extent Socrates and Plato imagined, I wonder what that would be like. I wonder if it could be livable. Might end up being like East Germany. I don't know. Anyway, that's my second take on Meditations, Marcus Aurelius. If you got this far, thank you very much. You're a wonder. Ta-ta for now.